Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another Historical Humans Reacts. And on today's episode, we're going to be looking at a Cleveland museum that is going to repatriate a $20 million statue after a multi-year long battle. And this is very interesting because I think a lot of people have lost their head over this lawsuit and this fight going back and forth. It just sometimes you have an argument that just gets decapitated after a while, and you know,
He acts like he wasn't practicing these in a mirror earlier.
I was just trying to think of how many head-related jokes I could make in a short span. But what's interesting is a Cleveland museum is going to be sending back a statue that had been looted and stolen from its original context before it was sold to the museum. And this is an issue that we've covered a few times on this channel, but tends to be a very pervasive issue, especially in the world of antiquities, where museums may have a source that comes off as legitimate, except they tend to be fencing stolen goods or looted goods in this case. And that's where we end up in this instance because the country of Turkey obviously wants their cool statue back, and to them it was stolen from their own backyard.
Yeah, and it's actually got a pretty interesting journey, this statue, for how it got to Cleveland and then gets sent back because the fake provenance that was set up for this statue actually kind of held up in court for a bit. This was very well faked
Also,
uh, in terms of lying about where it came from.
just the sad part is from what you were saying, how it ended up in Cleveland.
Yeah. How it
But
ended up in Cleveland. So to start with, this is a bronze statue believed to be depicting a Greek or Roman philosopher. It was built in the year 50. It stayed on display in what is now the archaeological site of Sebastion in Buban, Turkey, for about 200 years, where in the 3rd century it was buried by an earthquake.
that tends to
It's
happen with a lot of these statues, though, is they tend
yeah,
to be buried fairly quickly. Otherwise, they tend to either be looted, stolen, or melted down for their precious metals.
bronzes get melted very frequently. That's why most of the ones we find are the ones that have like been destroyed by a natural disaster because there was no people around to get it back.
Yeah. Oh God.
Yeah, and it stayed buried until some locals in Turkey uncovered it during the 1960s, and a number of villagers just started pulling things out of the ground, and they just sold it. It was, they treated it like anything else they might find on the land that they were working. I found it, it's mine, I sell it for money. And they sell several objects before the Turkish authorities figure out what's happening here and shut it down. And one of those objects is the statue.
That happens very frequently, though, and it becomes a really big issue when you talk to the general public because a lot of times people go into parks or, national parks, county parks, local wildlife refuges, and they'll go through and they'll pick up artifacts or cool things that they find. And to them, a lot of it's just finders keepers, and a lot of people tend to just start selling those things, especially if someone offers them good money and they're not making a heck of a lot of money themselves. Especially like a statue like this, because those local villagers got paid what they perceive to be a pretty good sum for it.
Yep.
But that's where a lot of these countries and a lot of these authorities really struggle with trafficking and with selling of looted goods, is because it's a very multifaceted issue. People are just trying to make ends meet. They're trying to make a living. Some of them are systematically just looted. But
Yep.
things like this come from the locals who go, "Oh yeah, we know that area with all those statues." And someone goes, "Well, if you get me one, I'll give you a few thousand
Yep.
dollars."
Yeah, and this seems to be the locals stumbled on this, realized what they had, and started trying to make money. And they started trying to make money with two fairly notorious traffickers, George Zakos and Robert Hecht. And it's Robert here that's getting all these paintings caught now, or all these artifacts caught, is
American Bob.
yeah, Robert, who the locals only knew as American Bob, so it was really hard to tie him, the man selling it in, New York and Ohio, back to the man buying it in Turkey, because they didn't have a proper name for him. What's happened is the district attorneys managed to identify American Bob as Robert Hecht. And so everything that has his name on it is getting scrutinized. And it's been found to be matching with things that are known to be missing.
It's very interesting though, because he ended up funneling these Buban bronzes, as they're called, into museum exhibitions, public publications, and they create this new provenance with it that ends up giving it this backstory, this authenticity that has been very difficult to scrutinize, because when it has the paperwork that's associated with legitimate artifacts, it's a lot harder, especially even when you do your due diligence, to find that. And so far, the DA office has ended up seizing 15 antiquities looted from Buban, and 14 of which have already been repatriated and are valued at $80 million. Yeah. So we're not talking about a few pennies here. This is a lot of money that has been sent back and forth.
Yeah, and the way they've been able to do it is effectively, Robert here was selling them as Robert under a different provenance. And once they figured out that this is the same Robert that was buying them from the villagers illegally in Turkey, suddenly everything that he sold, regardless of where he claimed it came from, got reviewed. And I believe most of the objects came from the Met that have since been repatriated. But, this is basically how they catch him, is, he can't legally hide his name when he's selling it to the museum.
It's very interesting because not only is this not the only case where this has happened, I mean, they very recently have repatriated statues from, I believe, the Museum of Modern Art. Was that correct? Metropolitan, so. Yeah, Museum of Art, not Modern Art, the Metro Museum of Art.
Yeah, the Met.
But that also, they ended up validating that this is a looted statue from Buban 14, because they ended up doing isotope analysis of the iron plug of the statue and found that soil located within that and within the statue corresponds with the soil samples of the area in which the statue was originated from. So they are able to really determine with pretty good conclusion that is where it's located. And that's what I think is really cool about the scientific side of archaeology, is you can use this isotope analysis to really pinpoint the origination location of a lot of artifacts, and you can basically tie it back. You can always, well, not always, but you can usually figure out where something originates because of that. And even humans, we have an isotope footprint that our teeth originate from when we were born, and our bones are where we lived. So we could tell where someone had moved based on the isotopes in the bones versus teeth.
Yeah. And one of the other fun things, one of the fun bits of evidence that ends up also going with the science and the names on the paperwork that, gets this, statue flagged for return, is, funnily enough, when it was, shall we say, laundered, it was laundered under the understanding that it was probably part of a set. It was believed to have originally been a statue of Marcus Aurelius, and was believed to be a part of a set with one of his early co-emperors, a man named Lucius Verus. And that statue was proven to be looted and repatriated in 2022, which makes a pretty strong case for, we have one half of the set, and the other half was clearly looted.
That is pretty cool. So this is an interesting conversation. I mean, the topic of repatriation has become a really hot debate in the antiquities and history fields. And I know I personally like to see things like this happen it does unfortunately suck for the museums and institutions because obviously when you have an incredible piece like this, you don't necessarily willingly want to give it up. But on the same token, I do think that artifacts do belong in their original context because that's what gives them the educational value and that provenance.
And this is was an especially hard thing for the Cleveland Museum of Art because it had been a centerpiece in their museum for 39 years.
Yeah.
So this wasn't some statue that was in a corner or even just in storage, not on display at all. This was a major piece of their show. This was a main attraction,
Yeah.
and they have to give it up, and it's good on them for willingly giving it up at this point instead of trying to double down and fight things further, because we've seen that happen too many times.
No, they did sue. They don't.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, they sued to keep it, but I'm saying like we've seen it when they lose the lawsuits, they resue or they appeal and they push it and push it and push it.
Which I think is exactly what this museum had done.
Yeah, but I'm not sure how far they push it. I'm saying like I've known them to never stop. Like there are so many
2009.
artifacts that are in infinite limbo because of this.
So the Turkish consulate had originally reached out to the museum in 2009
Yep.
and asked for the provenance documentation, basically just validating that it was authentic. And Turkey didn't necessarily declare itself the rightful true owner or otherwise, but they did try to fight to get the repatriation. And this also stems mainly from the DA's investigation.
Yeah.
But in the past, the museum has voluntarily transferred antiquities without the intervention.
Yeah. And one thing that like the DA does mention is that the DA is very happy that the museum has agreed to this and is not persisting in a claim that the statue rightfully belongs to the Cleveland Museum. They have conceded the defeat.
Yeah.
That's that losing with grace. Let's call it that, shall we?
But
Losing with grace is nice to see.
I think that's probably a great point for us to wrap up today's episode, though. Let us know your thoughts on the repatriation debate down below, and we'll see you guys in the next video.